Hi, it's Rich Hoffman here. So in relation to the Supreme Court decision not to support the premise for which President Trump deported gang criminals, I think the best way to understand that in the position of the court, with, from my perspective, a fresh context of spending a significant amount of time at the Supreme Court, kind of seeing things from their point of view. I think the best way to grapple with it is in the Masonic story of the murder of Hiram Abiff, or Hiram Abiff, depending on who's interpreting the story and how esoteric they want to go with it. But that's the architect of King Solomon's Temple, murdered by three ruffians, Jebullah, Jebulo, and Jebulum. And each of those murderers representing an aspect of society. The first representing the mob. The mob's always killing people throughout history, and when the mob rises up to dispose of a dynamic force to protect a static system, you get the first murderer. And of course, the second murderer represents the church and superstition, ruling through superstition. And that's a murder of society all its own. And then, of course, the third one is the representation of the state, and the state rules through fear. So in all cases, the Supreme Court is supposed to transcend all those elements. And in classic Masonic approaches to life, I may disagree with the premise of altruism, that is their giving back and surrendering your material self to the essence of the spirit world. But the drive to encourage mankind to step above and beyond and to want to be heavenly in their presence and the things that they do. That's why there was always a little bit of glitter to all their architectural projects. That's the purpose of Hiram Abiff's building of King Solomon's Temple. That's the purpose of the temple, is to create on earth as it is in heaven, and create a lofty perspective for which to honor God, the God of the universe, and to make yourself part of that. So what are the murderers that keep you from getting there? Of course, these three ruffians have wanted the secret word from Hiram Abiff as to how to go, and he wouldn't give it to him, so they killed him. And you see that that's a proper metaphor for where we are politically. We have President Trump in office. He's doing good things. We have a court system that's designed to put the brakes on so you don't have kingly powers. And you have a very evil system, evil existing as evil always has, that's kind of running in the background in one of those three forms, ruling through fear. And you have a Supreme Court that knows President Trump has Article 2 powers, clearly. But if they had come out and ruled, this is a lot kind of the same kind of games that went on with the ruling on Roe v. Wade with the abortion rights. You have 6 conservative Supreme Court members, supposedly, but they're people, and they live in communities where people see them in the street, and they go out to the mailbox to get mail. And there's sometimes angry mobs out there. You have senators like Chuck Schumer that has encouraged violence against Supreme Court members. So even though they can pretty much drive from their house into the parking garage and go straight into the Supreme Court and live kind of isolated from the outside world as much as possible, if they need to go over to Congress and talk to them, they can go through the tunnel and escorted by tight security. They don't really have to get out and deal with people, and they can isolate themselves pretty well, which I think is great for philosophic contemplations, but you can easily lose touch with reality. So when you're trying to put the brakes on a very powerful executive branch that's trying to deal with a military incursion, which is what the overwhelming with criminals from other countries through open border policies to overwhelm our system, which we've talked about a lot. That's a military incursion that a president has been elected to deal with. But the social policy of open borders and the global citizen movement and all these elements they've tried to attach to legal gymnastics takes time to work out in the courts. Just this is the way they committed election fraud in 2020. The courts couldn't process the information fast enough to have the inauguration. And everybody, all the prosecuting attorneys to go after Trump knew that they could get him knocked out of the White House, saying to Mar-a-Lago, be happy that you have your life. Otherwise, we'll murder you just like we did with Hiram Abiff. That's the everlasting lesson. Whether we're talking about Jesus Christ being assassinated for intruding on that political order, or Pythagoras, Socrates, you go through history and point out a number of these very historic characters that were murdered by the mob, or murdered by superstition, or murdered by the power of the state. And in the case of Jesus Christ, it was all three of those things that was behind the assassination. The mob picked Barabbas, not the good king of the Jews, as he was becoming known at the time. And the mob only knows what the mob knows. It sees a figure, it picks two people, and it picked the sinful despot, not the wholesome, battered individual that was being destroyed by one of those three ruffians. So the story of Hiram Abiff is a good way to explain kind of where the Supreme Court is on the issue, even though to common, normal people who this government is supposed to serve, it's pretty obvious to them. They're worried about being assassinated because they're very much aware of the contents of history and where the mob goes. And when you have the enemy always trying to stir up the mob, which Chuck Schumer certainly did when he encouraged mob violence against Supreme Court members, and there was never punishment for it, or they put rhetoric out that creates the assassinations. I recently saw Steve Scalise at the Capitol building, and he still has a noticeable limp from being shot and having his pelvis shattered by a bullet while they were playing a baseball game. And I feel sorry for him. I mean, he's a good guy, and people forget this is a guy that he could have easily been killed in that event. And you don't see Democrats out there prosecuting or demanding prosecution because the mob is their ally. Mob violence is the way that they want to stay in power. And they expect anytime someone's trying to go up those steps of knowledge or trying to elevate America into a great country, they want to put the brakes on that elevation by murdering him, just like they murdered Hiram Abiff on the steps of the King Solomon's temple. Are rising to higher knowledge, higher understanding, to be closer to God. You're trying to bring the United States, Trump is, into a wholesome country, and you have a lot of forces trying to overthrow it quite overtly. And they want to put a stop to it, so of course they've called out the mobs, put the brakes on judicial review, and the Supreme Court is positioning themselves in a way where fear is ruling over their decision making. And they hope that they can buy a little time by stalling their initial efforts, because it's clearly Article 2, President Trump has this authority. They want to show the mob that they are going to appease them with consideration. And that way they can't be blamed later when they have to rule on it. But if they ruled in favor of Trump now, then it would cause a lot of anger towards the court. They would look like they didn't have judicial independence. Even if that's the right call and it's the right rule of law, the appeasement of the mob is what the Supreme Court's worried about. And I can say that after spending some time there. No matter how isolated they make themselves, they can't help but fear that if they have members like Chuck Schumer out there and Ocasio-Cortez demanding the mob to go after those who are in the way of what they want to do, and that's spread evil. And that is the correct term for it. What else could you say that Chuck Schumer wanted to do when he was trying to incite the mob to have violence against the Supreme Court? If the Supreme Court loses the support of people like that in the Senate, and they're out there inciting the mob to come to their house and destroy them, and kill them, assassinate them, like it's happened all through history, the only thing they can do to defend themselves is appear to have some sort of consideration period and show a little indifference to Trump, even though Trump's on the right side of the law. That's not what we're trying to do here. They're trying to show that they're trying to appear fair from the perspective of the insurgents that want to do great harm. And so people are disappointed, and they're sad about the lack of courage that was exhibited by the Supreme Court. And, the Supreme Court and Gorsuch and Roberts and Comey Barrett, all those justices can justify, we're trying to look like we're independent of the executive branch here, and we're going to give this case some consideration, even though they know in the back of their minds they have to rule in favor of Trump. And that Trump has a right to deport criminals and illegal aliens that are brought to the United States to create malice and great harm. And so it's not a news story. This is why Masons have that as part of their initiation rituals, is the murder of Hiram Abiff and the three ruffians that represent various elements of society that are always causing a decline in mental elevation. The divorce from the material world into the spirit world, and the lofty expectations that people should arise to in their existence, and what holds them back. These murderers, the three ruffians who will destroy anything to keep people from elevating to that lofty perch. And that if you really want to have justice as one of those murdered characters, you hold on to the secrets and don't let the mob get a hold of them, because they're unenlightened and can't handle it. This is kind of what's behind the Supreme Court decision. They think that they have to protect themselves. They feel like they have to yield to the mob, because the mob could show up on the doorstep, and you have a political system that will encourage it. And they don't feel that they can rule boldly, as opposed to President Trump, who was just nearly assassinated, survived, and feels he has the hand of God at his back, and he can make bold decisions, and he's doing it. And the courts are going to challenge him because they haven't come to such realizations. I think they're good people that are scared, and that fear is part of the always present background that perpetuates evil, which is the story of Hiram Abiff and why he was murdered to begin with, why Pythagoras was murdered, and why Socrates was murdered, why murders always happen by those who awaken to bigger aspects. And it's gone all through history until President Trump was nearly killed at the same stage of his progression into that realm. But he survived. And the Supreme Court members are wondering if the same kind of luck will bestow them. Because the evidence is all around. All you have to do is see Steve Scalise and watch him limp around the Capitol, and you're reminded that the mob is out there, and they won't be prosecuted if they come after you. They'll be rewarded, just as ruffians and mobsters always do. And that's why Barabbas was freed, not Jesus. Something to think about. But as far as the Supreme Court, I think they'll eventually come down on the side of Trump, and that they're only staying this decision at the moment to appear to be fair and balanced, when they don't really have an obligation to that, but they're doing it because they don't want the mob to show up on their doorstep, encouraged by people like Chuck Schumer. And that's a reality we have to deal with boldness. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. And have a good day. See you later.